Good morning, everybody. We're live here from the birdhouse. It is Saturday, October 22nd, and today we're talking about the different types of squirrels you can find around here. There are several different types, and how you can keep them out of your feeders. We get a lot of questions about that year round, but as the temperatures get cooler, sometimes it can be more of an issue. So we'll talk about the different ways that you can keep them out of your feeders and even your bird houses. We also have wild wings. We've got birds of prey from wild wings here today. They're going to be here from 11 till 1, so they'll be here for a couple hours after this broadcast. So if you're looking for something to do today, pop on in and we will have them here. So that is here at the birdhouse from 11 until 1. If you have any questions, you can absolutely throw those in the comments, or you can just say hi. We'd love to know what kind of things you're seeing. If you're seeing any kind of juncos or white-throated sparrows, those red-breasted nuthatches, we'd love to hear what kind of things you're seeing out there at your feeders. And if you're out and about hiking, as some different birds are flowing into the area here with the cooler temperatures. So absolutely throw those in the comments as well. So in general, we're talking about squirrels. What is a squirrel? Squirrels are distinguished by their bushy tail. So you can tell them apart from other rodents because they do have that really bushy tail. They have chisel-like teeth. They have strong claws for climbing, and sharp claws, and strong legs too, also for climbing. And they have sensitive whiskers on their face and front legs to help them navigate. So they're very nimble as far as going up and down trees, on any kind of phone lines, power lines. If you've ever had a bird feeder pole up, you know that they can easily climb right up that pole, no problem. So they do have really strong legs and sensitive whiskers in order to help them navigate, which is pretty interesting. Squirrels are very territorial, which you might have noticed as well. On average, they live about 3 to 5 years in the wild, but some can live as long as 8 to 10 years. And color variations are quite common. So it's not uncommon to see squirrels that are different colors, especially gray squirrels around here. Like I've got some squirrels in my backyard that are more brownish in color, so I can definitely tell them apart. They're more like of a brownish reddish color. So the color variations can be very, very common. There's, of course, albino squirrels, and that's in the bottom left here is an albino gray squirrel. And you can tell it's albino because it's all white and it's got the red eye. But if you ever see a squirrel that is slightly white, like the one in the top corner here, that's called being leucistic. And so it's not totally albino because it's got the dark eye. It does have some coloration on its tail there. So there's different types of leucism. You can see that in birds as well. You can see it in any kind of animals where they're just lacking pigments, some pigments of their fur. So there's things called leucism, and that's this squirrel in the top right here. And then there's what's called being melanistic, which is this black variation here. So if you have what are called black squirrels, those are actually gray squirrels, but they are melanistic, and they can be quite common in certain areas. It's a dominant gene, so they can be quite common. Like in Toronto, there's definitely some. I know they have some at Tinker Nature Park, so you might have some in your neighborhood, and those are called melanistic squirrels, but they are gray squirrels. Some facts, amazing squirrel facts. Squirrels can find food buried beneath a foot of snow. So that's pretty impressive. A squirrel's front teeth never stop growing. So that's why they're constantly having to chew and chew and chew. A newborn squirrel is only about an inch long at birth. So very, very small at first. They do put on weight and get bulky to stay warm during the winter, which you might notice in your backyard, but they're eating more and they do get bigger as we're going into the winter. And they don't dig up everything that they cache. So squirrels, just like blue jays and some other birds, they cache food away in order to survive the winter, but they don't always find it all or dig it all up or use it all. And so that caching that they do can result in more trees or forest. So the most common squirrel we'll have here is the gray squirrel, and they will hoard food in numerous small caches to recover later. Some caches are recovered after only hours or days, and some not for months. So that they can cache things away for just short periods of time or long periods of time. One squirrel alone can make several thousand caches each season. So that's several thousand food items cached away. And they have an accurate spatial memory of the caches based on distant and nearby landmarks. So, trees, big rocks, boulders, things like that. That helps with their spatial memory. That's how they remember where things are. Smell, they also use their smell to uncover these caches. And the gray squirrel is considered to be one of these animals, like a white-tailed deer, that's crepuscular, that's more active during dusk and dawn. Although you'll see them out all day, they are more active at dusk and dawn, and they do not hibernate. So you will see them all winter long, especially if you've got bird feeders out there. And I like to add this picture here of their paw prints, which you can find in the snow. That's a really common thing to see in your backyard, is this little arrangement here of paw prints that is from the gray squirrel. Gray squirrels will roost in hollow cavities or screech owl houses in the winter. So if you do have screech owl or even woodpecker houses out, they might go inside there, but then they'll usually leave by the spring. If you have a screech owl house and you're concerned that there's a squirrel in it, and we're getting towards the spring, usually the owl can just chase them out just fine. Usually the owl wins. They do make nests in trees to raise their young. So in the spring and in the summer, they make these really pretty large leaf nests in trees, and those are called drays. They can breed twice a year, and the first litter is born pretty early. It's born in February or March, and then the second litter is usually born in June or July. So they can have a couple litters a year, and with each litter, there's anywhere from 1 to 4 young. So another species of squirrel we have here is the red squirrel. They're smaller than the gray squirrel. They are very, very territorial. If you've ever had red squirrels in your yard, you've probably seen them chase away the chipmunks. They'll chase away the gray squirrels. They're super territorial. They're found primarily around conifer trees. So they do like pine cones and that kind of thing. They are most active during the day, diurnal, and they also do not hibernate. So you can see them in the winter months as well. So they feed primarily on seeds of conifers. They'll begin caching seeds in a central location in the summer to last through the winter and into the following spring. They can have anywhere from 1 to 7 sites where they will cache their food. And most have only 1 litter per year of anywhere between 3 and 4 offspring. And if you've got red squirrels around, you probably know, because they are very, very vocal. They have all kinds of different sounds that they make. And we've got them behind the store, and every day I hear them chattering and making all their sounds. They don't like it when we pull into the back parking lot. You can hear them making all their chattering sounds. So they are very, very vocal. Another species of squirrel we have are chipmunks. So chipmunks are in the squirrel family. If you go out west, they have all kinds of different species of chipmunks. But here we just have the eastern chipmunk. They live in wooded areas, parks, super common in backyards. They prefer a habitat with brush piles, logs, or rocky surfaces to hide in. They have anywhere from 1 to 2 litters a year of 3 to 5 young each. And this species will go through a long period of rest in the winter called torpor, almost like a hibernation. So you probably won't see them at your feeders in the winter time. They will stir sometimes in the winter, especially if it gets warmer. If we have kind of a warm spell, you might see them come out of their burrows. But in general, they're going to be underground in their burrows during the winter season. So you probably won't see them all winter long. They tend to kind of hunker down. They can climb trees, but you'll often see them on the ground. And they do construct elaborate tunnel systems that have different little compartments, and those compartments have specific uses. So they have places where they will sleep or nest. They have places where they'll raise their young. They have places where they will hold their food. So they do have these really elaborate tunnel systems that are under the ground. Many are active during the day, and they transport food in their cheek pouches, which you've probably seen before. They can shove their cheeks pretty full of different types of food. We also have what are called flying squirrels here. fly like bats do. So bats can actually fly like a bird, but flying squirrels will glide from tree to tree. They have what's called a patagium. It's like a flap of skin that goes from their forelimbs to their hind limbs, and they use that to glide from the trees, like from treetop to treetop. And so that stretches from their wrists to their ankles and allows for them to glide. And their tail will provide for stability and flight. So here's a flying squirrel there that is gliding. Now they're nocturnal, so you don't see them as often as you do the gray squirrels or the red squirrels, but you might hear them chattering at night. Sometimes people get them at their feeders at night. Sometimes people will even see them in birdhouses, like in bluebird houses. They can squeak in there, and they can roost in birdhouses as well. They'll spend the winter in tree cavities, and they will also, like the gray squirrel, make nest in trees in the spring and in the summer. And there's two different species. There's the northern flying squirrel and the southern flying squirrel. So there are a couple different flying squirrel species here. And then finally, the last kind of squirrel that we do have around here is the woodchuck or the groundhog, and they are in the squirrel family. And you'll find them usually just on the ground, but they can climb trees. I actually have seen one climb a tree once when I accidentally startled one, went right up a tree. They belong to a family of large ground squirrels called marmots. Again, if you go out west, there's different types of marmots you'll see, but here we've got just the one species. Their teeth grow really, really quickly. They can grow about 1/16 of an inch per week, which is pretty crazy. They are well adapted for digging. They will also burrow under the ground, and they're mostly herbivorous, so that they're eating mostly grasses. You really don't see them too often underneath your bird feeders going after seed or anything like that, but they will go after your plants in your garden. And when they are threatened, they will retreat to their burrows. They use those burrows to sleep, to raise their young, to hibernate. So this is another species that is not active during the winter. They undergo true hibernation, where they'll kind of fall asleep and slow down all winter long to emerge in the springtime. And as far as their burrows go, one study found that an average woodchuck burrow has had 384 pounds of dirt excavated to make it, which is pretty crazy. I don't know who did that study, but I thought that was a pretty interesting fact as far as the woodchucks go. So now, as far as keeping squirrels out of your feeders, that can be a challenge. If you've ever put out any kind of bird feeder and it's not a squirrel-proof feeder, this is probably what you will see at some point or another. It is possible to squirrel-proof feeders. It can be a challenge, and depending on your setup, it can take some time to get it done, but it is possible. So I'll show you some different ways that you can do that. And the first is getting a squirrel-proof feeder. That might be the best thing you can do, especially if you don't have a bird feeder yet and you're thinking about getting one or getting a new one. A squirrel-proof feeder is the way to go, because in general, no matter where you put it, the squirrel can't get to the seed. So that's usually the case, depending on how you hang it. Every once in a while, the squirrel can maneuver it, but there are ways to hang them up so the squirrel doesn't get them. So a feeder like this here, which is weight sensitive, so squirrel-proof feeders are all weight sensitive. So when a squirrel gets on them, something usually shuts down or drops down, so the squirrel falls off the feeder or can't get to the food. And those work really well because the squirrel is so much heavier than the birds. So birds are all mostly feathers. Their bones are hollow, so they're super, super light. But the squirrels are much heavier in comparison. So when they get on the feeder, there can be these mechanisms on them to shut them down so the squirrels can't get to the food. So this one, for example, is called the Squirrel Buster Plus. This is a really good seller for us. And it has a ring around the bottom that when the squirrel gets on it, it shuts down. And this is actually weight sensitive too. You can adjust the weight sensitivity of it. So you can make it so chipmunks set it off, so red squirrels set it off. So this one's really, really nice in that regard. Now, when you put up a squirrel-proof feeder, the thing you want to be careful is if you put it on a shepherd's hook, which sticks in the ground, sometimes the squirrels can climb up that shepherd's hook and then just reach over to the squirrel-proof feeder and feed from it. So you want to make sure if you are putting a squirrel-proof feeder on some kind of a hook, like a shepherd's hook, that the hook itself, the thing you're hanging the feeder is 18 inches or so long, because if it's that long, it reaches out far enough that the squirrel can't climb up the pole and just grab the feeder. And I'll show you some photos later of what that kind of looks like. Here's some other squirrel-proof feeders. Again, weight sensitive. These are Squirrel Buster feeders. The one on the left here is called the Legacy, and that is also weight adjustable, so you can make it so even larger birds set it off. Like if you've got a ton of grackles, somebody the other day had a whole bunch of blue jays. They were trying to kind of trying to make it so just the smaller birds could get on their feeders and have the blue jays go elsewhere. So if you get one of these, you can make it so that it does happen. This one on the right is called the Squirrel Buster Classic. That one's not weight adjustable, but that's a really good feeder. I've had that one for several years in my yard, and I've never had a squirrel on it. So I love that feeder. There are some that will send the squirrels flying off of them. This is called the flipper. It's really funny. Again, weight sensitive perch. If a squirrel goes on it, that perch just spins around and around and around until the squirrel flies off of it. So that one's really fun. There's also some called the tipper, which has a tray that falls off. This is called the whipper. It's got perches that collapse. And this is another version called the dipper that has little perches on it. So this is good for finches and the smaller birds. And any of these 4 feeders are, I like these because, well, the flipper is fun and it sends the squirrels flying through the air, but it also holds 5 pounds of seed. So you don't need to fill it all too often. So whereas I'm filling my Squirrel Buster every day, the flipper, I can usually get 2 days worth of seed from it before I have to fill it. There are these kind of feeders. This is a type of what's called a hopper feeder, so it holds a lot of seed as well. So some of these can hold up to like 10 pounds of seed, which is nice. And this has a weight sensitive perch on it here that the cardinal is sitting on. If the squirrel gets on it, this metal plate here that's above the cardinal's head will go down and will cut off their access to the seeds. So we have these. These are nice because you can hang them. They also come with a pole, so you can just put them right in the ground. So those are nice. There's also feeders that have cages around them. So we've got sunflower seed feeders with cages around them. There's also suet feeders that have cages around them to keep the squirrels out. These are nice because the little birds can feed from it. The bigger birds usually cling onto the bottom of it and kind of put their beak inside, so it can be a little bit difficult for the larger woodpeckers to feed on things with cages around them. Same with the larger birds. So if you've got a sunflower seed feeder that has a cage around it, you'll probably notice you don't get many blue jays or cardinals around because it's hard for them to feed, but they'll sometimes feed off the ground as well. So you usually will get some, just not as many as you would get if you didn't have a cage around it. Now we do have a squirrel-proof suet feeder that is good for the larger birds. That's this one. This it's pretty big. It's another feeder in that Squirrel Buster line, but it allows you to get the larger woodpeckers on it pretty easily, like the red-bellied woodpecker or even a pileated woodpecker, if you're able to get those. And it's pretty elaborate if you've ever seen it or seen it in action. But how it works is it does have that paddle tail feature, which we're always talking about. So it has the projection at the bottom so the larger woodpeckers can prop their tail up on it. And the birds will feed from this little gap here at the bottom of the feeder. And if a squirrel gets on it, this plate here that's under the nuthatch will just shut down so they can't get to the food. So this one's pretty big and pretty elaborate. It holds 2 suet cakes, which is nice. You don't have to fill it all too often. But personally, I'd like to dissuade squirrels in other ways, like with using the hot pepper suet, which I'll show you guys too. So here is a pole system set up. So for example, if you didn't have what's called a baffle on the pole and you were just hanging feeders from it, the squirrel-proof feeders, you want to make sure that the hooks here, like these hooks at the top, are probably only about like 12 inches or so, but you can get arms that stretch out longer to be 18 inches away from the pole. That's what you want to do in order to keep squirrels off of your squirrel-proof feeder that's mounted on a pole. So if you've got squirrel-proof feeders on a pole with the hooks that are too short, you might find that the squirrels can still climb up that pole and they'll reach over to the feeder and pull it over to themselves, and they don't activate that squirrel-proof mechanism that's weight sensitive. So here is a pole system, and if you put up a pole, you want to make sure you put a baffle on it. And baffles are these contraptions here that will, and the idea there is the squirrel can't climb up and around it to get to the feeders. So we have feedback sometimes from people that say, oh, well, they just jump over it. That is absolutely the case if it's not high enough. So you want to make sure that they're at least 4 or 5 feet high. Keep in mind, squirrels can jump about 5 feet high. They can jump about 5 feet up. They can jump about 7 feet across. So say from the side of a tree or from a tree branch across to your feeders, so they can almost spring themselves 7 feet across from one thing to another, and they'll jump from about 9 feet high from something up top, say a tree branch, down onto your feeders. So we call it the 5-7-9 rule. So you want to make sure that your feeder pole setup has a baffle that's at least 4 or 5 feet up off of the ground, and it's at least 7 feet away from something like a deck or a tree that the squirrel can just launch itself onto. If you can do that, then having a baffle on the pole will keep squirrels off of your feeders. So it is possible, but you want to make sure that everything is far enough away that they can't launch themselves. There's different baffles you can get. Some of them will wrap around the poles. Some of them slide down on top of the pole. So depending on your setup, there's different baffles that you can use that will work just fine. So say you don't want to use a baffle, or if you've got hardware that's off of your deck. So we do sell clamp-on arms or screw-in arms that'll attach to a deck or the side of a house, and the squirrels can easily just climb all over those. You can put what's called a squirrel slinky on them. It's a super simple idea, but this slinky will attach onto the pole, and the squirrel just then can't get a grip on the slinky. They'll just grab it, keep grabbing it, and they'll just keep falling off. So this is another thing you can do to keep squirrels off your feeders, especially if they're in a place where you can't really baffle them. Then there's the hot sauces. So putting some hot sauce like this, which is called Flaming Squirrel, on your seed will keep squirrels off as well. This will also keep deer from raiding your feeders too. So if you've got that issue, you can put some hot sauce in your seed, and that will help keep the deer away. The idea with this is that mammals have more taste buds than birds do, and they can taste the hot sauce, but the birds can't. So mammals will taste that there's something really fiery on the seed. They don't like it. They'll go elsewhere, but the birds can't taste it, and it doesn't harm the birds in any way. So you can mix some of this hot sauce in with your seed. We have some seed that's already treated with it, which I like, because then you don't have to mess with the sauce and possibly getting it on your hands or anything like that. So you can do either one of those to help keep the squirrels out of your feeder. There's also suet that has the hot sauce and hot pepper mixed in with it, and that is our best seller, and that really helps keep squirrels out of your suet. You can, of course, do the squirrel-proof suet feeders with the big cages and stuff around them. But if you've got a small suet feeder and you don't want to get something that's really, really big, try the hot pepper suet, because that really, really works to keep the squirrels out. And then there's seed that the squirrels don't really like. Safflower seed, which we talk a lot about, especially in the spring, as grackles and starlings are raiding people's feeders more so than usual. People switch to safflower seed. Grackles don't like it. Starlings don't like it. And neither do the squirrels, really. So this is really good for window feeders. So if you've got a window feeder and it's hard to squirrel proof, you could put something like safflower inside of it. Apparently it has more of a bitter taste, and the squirrels don't like it for some reason. But this is the favorite of cardinals. House finches absolutely love it. So this is a type of seed you can put in your feeders that will help keep squirrels away. And for those of you that are having huge flocks of Grackles, someone mentioned on Tuesday, they had a huge flock of grackles coming to their feeders. We've been getting them all week here at the store too. It's insane. The trees have just been covered with them, and they're raiding the feeders like mad. You can put some safflower in your feeders, and they don't really like that. So that's something you can do now if you do have that issue also with the grackles. And then this is couple suet feeders here that you can put the hot pepper suet in. Not squirrel proof though, so if you've got a suet feeder like this, in order to squirrel proof it, you'd want to put in that hot pepper suet. And then take them out of birdhouses as well. So if you've got squirrels that are raiding your birdhouses in the spring, you can do a couple things. You can put metal plates over the front of the house. That'll keep them from chewing the hole and making it bigger. They can still reach inside though, and squirrels, raccoons also, are known to raid birdhouses. They'll grab the eggs. Sometimes they'll grab the young. You can put these little tunnels on the outside of the house, and the idea of these tunnels are they make it impossible for the squirrels to actually reach inside the house. So they can't reach their arm inside and down into that nesting cavity to grab the nestlings or grab the eggs. So if you do have squirrels that are troublesome in your yard in the spring, raiding your nest boxes, you can put these up as well. So those are the tips that we have in order to keep squirrels out of your feeders and houses. If you have any questions, you can absolutely put them in the comments. Keep in mind, we do have birds of prey from Wild Wings here today at the store. They will be arriving in about a half an hour. They're going to be here from 11 to 1. And next Saturday, which is the 29th, we have our monthly jigsaw puzzle swap going on too. That's become quite popular, and we actually have a pretty big stash of puzzles here. We've got lots of people who just brought more than they want to take back with them. So we've got a really good stash of jigsaw puzzles here. So you can come in anytime between 10 and noon next week for that jigsaw puzzle swap. So we've got a couple things going on. Those of you familiar with the author Stan Tequila, he'll be joining us in a couple of weeks on a live stream as well. So we've got that to look forward to too. So you can visit our website or our Facebook page if you're streaming this from Facebook. We've got our events up on Facebook as well. Ed is on. He says, "Good morning, all. Due to growth of a redbud tree planted years ago, the squirrels learned they had great access to our feeders this summer. As a result, we had to bring our flipper feeder out of retirement and charge it up. Not only does it work great, we now have great entertainment from spinning and flipping squirrels. They learn pretty quickly. It's not worth the effort to even try anymore." Yeah, so I've got the flipper too. It's really fun. That's this feeder here. And I should have put a video in here of showing it in action, but the perch will just swing around and around and around if the squirrel gets on it until the squirrel gets thrown off the feeder. So that one's really fun. And yeah, it definitely works, holds a lot of seeds. So that one's a great feeder. So looks like that's the only comment today. We'll be back on Tuesday with another live stream, and we'll share some more of your photos and your sightings. We'll give you an update on the birds that people are seeing around the area. So we'll be back then. And until then, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.